recognizable as an American archetype precisely because he was so aligned with the central principle of this liberalism: individual freedom. I wanted to celebrate this liberalism and argue that a free society, not necessarily free of all bigotry, but certainly free of all illegal discrimination, was what America owed minorities. After that, we minorities should simply be left alone. We should not be smothered, as we have been, by the new paternalistic liberalism that emerged in the mid-1960s, a guilt-driven liberalism that has imposed itself through a series of ineffective and even destructive government programs and policies. We should be left to find our own way as free men and women in this fast-paced and highly competitive society. In many ways, the minority struggle for freedom, just like white America's long-ago struggle for freedom from British rule, has been a battle to have no oppressive or capricious power intervene between the individual and his pursuit of happiness. How, then, does it constitute progress for minorities to overcome bigotry as a limit on their freedom, only to subject themselves to a paternalistic interventionism inspired by white guilt? There is no true freedom either way. This was the impropriety, the lapse of good manners that made for provocation. A freedom that could not guarantee a positive outcome for blacks, America's classic victims, was perceived as unfair. So whether I was right or wrong was irrelevant next to the unseemliness of speaking about black Americans in the light of self-help and individual responsibility, two entirely conventional values that came to be labeled conservative only after the 1960s, and then primarily in relation to minorities. I am used to being in situations where mention of such conservative values amounts to an impropriety. On today's political landscape, there are few people more inherently provocative, more unforeseen and unsettling than people like myself who are designated black conservative. All the other permutations of racial and political identity are expected: white liberal or white conservative, Hispanic liberal or Hispanic conservative, black liberal. We know their cultural profiles: the Hispanic who is hardworking, Catholic and conservative, the upscale Connecticut white liberal, the black of almost any background who is presumed liberal simply for being black. Black conservatives confound expectation. Worse, we seem to put the moral authority that comes from our race's great suffering into the service of an ideology, conservatism, that many see as a source of that suffering. By this logic, the black conservative can only be opportunistic, or worse, self-hating and sycophantic. So in a setting like the Aspen Institute, where liberalism is simple etiquette and where criticism of minorities is verboten, the black conservative inevitably gives offense. And I saw that my little end-of-white guilt speech had done just that when I arrived the next day for my panel discussion on race and politics. As I stepped onto the stage, the moderator of my panel, a solicitous young black writer who kept reassuring me that he would be fair to me despite the obvious gulf between us, immediately called me into a huddle. And there I was confronted with a very agitated young white man, someone not on the panel, who implored me to give him a few minutes with the audience before the panel began, so that he could respond to my remarks of the previous day. It was my call to make, and simple common sense told me to say no. Clearly, this was someone who had spent the previous 24 hours stewing in outrage over my call for an end to white guilt. Why give a platform to such an openly declared enemy? But then I heard myself say, "Go right ahead." He looked startled, and then rushed to the podium as if afraid that I might change my mind. But I wouldn't have. I try to follow that ethic by which one gives wide berth to one's opposition. So I took my designated chair on the panel and listened as this jumpy young man beseeched the audience not to believe what I had said the day before. He was slight and blond, likely a graduate student, and he spoke with a kind of mimed passion that made him seem theatrical. For effect, he would occasionally look over his shoulder at me as if to shudder at an unspeakable menace. He wanted this nice and unsuspecting Aspen audience to know that I was selling false consolation by seducing them into the fiction that white guilt was now a greater problem for minorities than white racism. He wanted to reassure them that